Section 12 of Women of the War by Barbara McLaren. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by T.R. Love. 28. Lady Lugard and the War Refugees Committee. In her work for the great population of Belgian refugees who came over to England in the first few months of war, Lady Lugard has helped to carry out one of the highest missions to suffering humanity. Quick to grasp the significance of the German advance through Belgium, Lady Lugard, in the first week of the war, turned her thoughts to the plight of the unfortunate women and children driven from their ruined homes with nothing left to them save life itself. Where were they to go, and what was to become of them? Obviously, England offered the only safe refuge. Lady Lugard knew of the complete and detailed arrangements which had been worked out during the summer of 1914 for the reception of refugees from Ulster in the event of the anticipation of civil war being realized. Understanding the importance of rapid action and the value of a good organization, Lady Lugard asked the help of the Ulster leaders, who willingly placed their machinery at the disposal of workers in such a worthy cause. After enlisting the support of Cardinal Bourne and the leaders of the Roman Catholic Church, and having obtained the consent and advice of both the Foreign Office and of the Belgian authorities, Lady Lugard, with the help of Mrs. Alfred Littleton, formed a committee. But there was little time for deliberation or arrangement before she and her helpers were rushed into action. Warned on one day that a shipload of possibly 1,000 refugees might be with them on the next, they had immediately to arrange offices, raise funds, and prepare accommodation. Mr. Norrie Miller, the manager of the General Accident, Fire, and Life Assurance Corporation, placed offices at the committee's disposal free of charge, and secured the nucleus of a clerical staff. The organization decided to be known as the War Refugees Committee. Its non-political and non-sectarian character was marked by the fact that Lord Hugh Cecil became chairman and Lord Gladstone treasurer, while the Roman Catholic and Jewish churches were represented among its members. Lady Lugard and Mrs. Littleton at once proceeded to issue an appeal through the newspapers. The response was overwhelming. All England was burning with admiration and pride at the great part which Belgium was playing. Throughout the country, from homes humble and great, rich and poor, money and offers of help flowed in on such a scale that even with the best endeavors it took many days before they could be acknowledged and classified. Eagerness to help the victims, whose suffering was part of the price Belgium had to pay in her fight for honor, was England's tribute of admiration. The next question was the momentous one of temporary accommodation for the refugees on arrival. With the assistance of an ever-increasing group of willing volunteer workers, the War Refugees Committee soon arranged for beds and food to be prepared in the buildings placed at their disposal. These were hastily improvised as hostels, with the help of generous loans of linen and crockery. If the accommodation at first was sketchy, there were at least beds and food for all who came, and eager sympathy and welcome. They needed all the help and comfort which could be given to them, these dazed and terrified people, with the haunted look of horror on their faces. They had endured experiences which our civilization could have ascribed only to a bygone age, and which we little thought could pollute the earth again. During the next weeks, the stream of refugees flowed into London in ever greater numbers. The work of the War Refugees Committee soon classified itself automatically into departments. The clerical department had to cope with correspondence, which within a fortnight had mounted to many thousands of letters a day, containing money contributions and placing accommodation for 100,000 people at the disposal of the committee. Refugees had to be received on arrival and temporarily housed. The question then arose of their allocation to more permanent headquarters and of arranging that offers of hospitality from all over the country should be responded to by suitable allotment of refugees. From the first it was found advisable to decentralize as much as possible and to allow the local committees formed throughout the country to make most of the detailed arrangements for allocation. These committees numbered before long between 2,000 and 3,000. Questions of transport and clothing were in the hands of other rapidly organized departments. Every day the number of refugees increased, and members of the committees worked almost without rest day and night. In the first week of September, a government invitation was published offering refuge in England to the Belgian civilian population. The magnitude of the task thus became beyond the management of a group of private individuals, and the committee was relieved of a certain amount of anxiety by the provision of refuges on a big scale in London at government expense. Though the work was now extended and receiving government assistance, it was to the War Refugees Committee, which about this time was placed by mutual consent under the general direction of Lord Gladstone, that the authorities turned to carry on the great task. The committee has continued to work throughout in close cooperation with the government departments, particularly the local government board. Large buildings such as the Alexandra Palace and the Earl's Court Exhibition buildings were taken over and prepared for the reception of the refugees, serving as clearing-houses whence they could be sent on to the provinces, where arrangements for hospitality were made both by local communities and by private individuals. The staff of voluntary helpers in London soon reached 500, who threw themselves with undaunted energy and devotion into the task which Lady Lugard herself had described as the consolation of a nation by a nation. In all her personal intercourse with the Belgian refugees, especially of the working class, Lady Lugard has said that what struck her most was their pathetic fortitude and the way in which, in their hour of desperate need, they clung to their religion. Chapels and oratories were rapidly established wherever Belgians were received, and the Roman Catholic Church and community worked unremittingly to comfort and console them. I don't know how many thousand rosaries I distributed in those days, said Lady Lugard afterwards. Wherever I went, the Belgians seemed to clamor for them above everything. It should also be mentioned that the Jewish community in London took a very active part in helping their co-religionists among the refugees. From September till Christmas 1914, the flow of refugees continued, the fall of Antwerp in October bringing a tremendous rush of work amid surging crowds. On one day in October, the number of refugees handled by the committee amounted to 6,621. By February 1915, their arrival in anything like large numbers had practically ceased, but other problems sprang up. It became obvious that the war was to last longer than the few months which optimists of the early days prophesied. It was therefore decided, after considerable hesitation, that it was better, both in their own interests and in those of the community at large, that the Belgians, who had lived almost entirely as guests, should be allowed to work and to become gradually self-supporting. In the 2 years which have elapsed, the working-class people who formed the bulk of the refugees, while giving still some occasion for preoccupation and expense to their own and to the British governments, have become practically absorbed. In the ever-increasing demand for labor, the Belgians, who are known to be among the best craftsmen and laborers in Europe, have found a ready market for their work. There has remained the comparatively small number of refugees of a different class, unaccustomed to earn their own living, but rendered destitute as the poorest artisans by the devastation of their country. The great initial work accomplished, Lady Lugard and the many others who had by this time become absorbed in the work of consolation turned to making suitable provision for this group, which included families of high social position, artists, and professionals in many spheres of work. Men and women suddenly snatched from circumstances of prosperity and ease and confronted with the problems of bare existence. To assist these unfortunate people, Lady Lugard organized a small hospitality committee. She and her helpers proceeded to arrange a system in London, and similar arrangements have been evolved on private initiative in the great centres in the provinces. In London, large houses were placed one by one at the committee's disposal, and social groups of Belgian families were established in them. In these hostels, family life is as far as possible reproduced. Questions of education, health, and clothing receive special care and attention, and the attempt has been made to classify the houses in such a way as to bring friends and potential friends into the same circles. The results have been most satisfactory. The domestic management is undertaken in each house by a competent manager, sometimes Belgian, sometimes English, appointed by Lady Lugard's committee. Many of the managers are lady volunteers, who give the whole of their time to the promotion of happiness and comfort in what one of the guests has described as ces petits coins de Belgique. The one rule of the committee is to try and make the Belgians happy. If their lives are necessarily restricted and limited by circumstances, these Belgian guests are at any rate living in quiet resting places, recovering, it is hoped, from the shock of their experiences, educating their children, and meanwhile possessing their souls in patience till the day of their country's liberation. The numbers in which the Belgian population took refuge in England from first to last have been so great, and the rush in the beginning so bewildering, that it would have been impossible to carry out a work of necessity hastily improvised without mistakes and difficulties. Lady Lugard is the first to admit how far the schemes fell short of the perfection which she had hoped to achieve. But when the story of this flight of a nation is told, history will remember not the misunderstandings, the mistakes in detail, or the want of foresight, which seem inevitable in all human undertakings, but the way in which the English people opened their arms in welcome to the Belgians, and their desire to comfort and to heal. To Lady Lugard personally must be ascribed full recognition for a truly great service. By her promptitude, her imagination, and her unsparing gifts of energy and devotion, she stands out amongst the throng of splendid volunteers in the service of Belgium. 29. Miss Christabel Ellis. Since the early days of the war, the aspect of our streets has undergone many changes, but there is no more certain sign of the times than the sight of women in khaki uniforms and military badges driving army motors and lorries. Though these enterprising women excited surprise some months ago, they are fast becoming as numerous as men drivers. The women drivers of the Army are under the management of a department of the Women's Legion, and form a part of the Women's Auxiliary Army Corps. At the head of the motor branch is Miss Christabel Ellis, who has in her hands the development of a great new scope of activity and usefulness for women workers. Miss Ellis, already an experienced motorist, offered her services to the French Red Cross in September 1914, and for some months she drove for them, and also for the British Red Cross Society in France. During the days of the Battle of the Marne and the heavy fighting near Paris, the shortage of ambulances and drivers was so great that Miss Ellis sometimes drove for 20 hours at a stretch. At the end of 1914 she went to Serbia, where she managed the commissariat, storekeeping, and military returns for a group of 5 Red Cross hospitals for over a year, till the final torrent of invasion swept over that unhappy country. On Miss Ellis's return to England, she found that the demand for trained motor drivers and mechanics was fast outpacing the supply. Her own successful experience of motor work under the roughest conditions had taught her how well the services of women might be used to supplement men, especially in England, with the advantages of good roads and help in difficulties usually to be had close at hand. Miss Ellis discussed her ideas with Lady Londonderry, who had organized the Women's Legion for war service, and as a result of their representations, they were given permission to supply 20 women drivers as an experiment to take up work under the War Office in May 1916. The great value of women's employment in motor work lies in the fact that the men whom they are releasing are precisely the most valuable class of workers, namely, trained mechanics, of whom there is an all too limited supply, which can only be augmented by the slow process of training others. Much of the work which the women drivers are undertaking is work upon which highly skilled men were wasted. Driving cars, for instance, for staff officers involves many empty hours simply spent in waiting. The women's reception by the men whose work they are taking over has been generous in the extreme. No trouble has been spared to help the girls in every possible way and to assist them to maintain the high standard of Army efficiency. The girl drivers work long hours, for they have to be on duty by 8 a.m. and often do not put their cars away till late at night, but they stand the strain of the life wonderfully well, and in spite of the bitter cold of last winter, there were few who dropped from the ranks. It cannot, of course, be maintained that the women's mechanical knowledge equals that of some of the men they are replacing, but the standard of care of their engines and cars increases with their experience, and their capacity and skill in driving are undoubted. Besides motor driving, there are other branches of women's work under the same department. There are corps of women dispatch riders, motor bicyclists, whose services are proving most valuable. Women are also taking over the charge of Army mechanical stores. This is responsible work which requires great accuracy, for if incorrect supplies are handed out, endless delay may be caused to the convoys. In the delicate and intricate work of assembling aeroplane engines, women also working under this department are proving more and more efficient. The numbers of women employed in this dilution of men's labor will soon reach many thousands, and the way in which they have succeeded in overcoming considerable prejudice against their employment in the Army is in itself testimony to their efficiency. To Miss Ellis belongs the recognition due to a woman who has been able to give personal proof of women's capacity in a comparatively new field. End of section 12.